Blade Runner is one of the best science fiction movies ever made. But how do you turn that film into a game? And more importantly, is the game any good? Let's find out. Hello and welcome back to Retro Games in Rally English. My name is Juho Kuorekoski, I'm a Finnish journalist and a non-fiction author, and I'm here to talk about old games in my very Finnish English. Today we will be traveling to the distant future of November 2019. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite games of the 1990s, which is Westwood's Blade Runner. As is the case with Star Trek 25th Anniversary, Blade Runner is a damn good game, but it is also a prime example of a licensed game done right. But unlike Interplay, who continued the story of the original Star Trek, Westwood took a bit different road with their game. Blade Runner the game tells an original story in parallel with Blade Runner the movie. So, let's dive in and see if androids actually do dream of electric sheep. Released in 1997 by Westwood and Virgin Interactive, Blade Runner is an interactive detective story in the vein of Ridley Scott's legendary movie. Packed onto a whopping 4 CD-ROMs, the game tells the story of Ray McCoy, a rookie Blade Runner who's sent to investigate animal killings. By accident, McCoy runs into rogue replicants and the case becomes a lot more complicated. For those of you who are new to Blade Runner, replicants are artificial labor force of the future, androids with superhuman physique. As Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard in the movie, Ray McCoy drifts on a collision course with the replicants. The running theme of the game is what it means to be human, and how and why are the replicants any different from us. Although Westwood's Blade Runner is a detective story by heart, it's wonderful to see that there's also another, more deeper layer to the story. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner is based on Philip K. Dick's 1968 science fiction novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The film adaptation takes some liberties from the source material, but the central theme of different aspects of humanity is same in all three mediums, the novel, the film, and the game. While the movie is intentionally somewhat ambiguous regarding the theme, in the game you are actually creating and redefining this definition through interaction. In Dick's novel, it is stated that replicants, or androids as they are depicted in the novel, are incapable of feeling empathy, and this is why they get caught in the Voight-Kampff test. But what is empathy? Does morals and ethic define what it is to be human? What separates humans from replicants? And does it even matter? Depending on a playthrough, these questions and statements can mean different things. Blade Runner is a game that makes you think, and on a standpoint of game design, it offers several different perspectives through a seemingly static narrative. The game is very cutscene heavy. When a scene changes, camera follows the main character. Thanks to the attention to little details, the Los Angeles of the distant future of 2019 feels alive. There's always something happening, crowds walking by, water running, or smoke twirling in the air. Blade Runner has aged relatively well, which can't be said about all the games of the same era. Although the resolution of the game is in modern standards quite low, the set design and the overall style of the game still pleases the eye. Blade Runner isn't just beautiful audio visuals and references to the movie. The interactive elements become the defining features of the title, as they should when a medium is a game where choices and consequences form the backbone of the experience. The interaction also defines, controls, and adapts the narrative. You get to make choices that have an actual impact on the story and the way it is told. Blade Runner challenges you to consider the definition of humanity, and does this from more perspectives than just one. Adventure games are usually scripted from start to finish. They are an obstacle course of sorts that needs to be cleared just the way the designers want you to. Blade Runner does things a little bit different, and this is where things get interesting. The game offers several different perspectives on the story, and they can alternate in every playthrough. The gameplay is controlled by artificial intelligence, which isn't very common in adventure games. Every character of the game has an agenda that they are fulfilling. Once they reach their goal, they move on to the next task on their list. They don't just stand around waiting for the player to interact and get to the next part of the flowchart of the game script. This makes the game dynamic. The world doesn't just stand still while Ray McCoy does his blade running. Due to the dynamic nature of the environments and characters, the world around the main character feels alive, because it is alive, at least on a game's perspective. There are several different cuts of the movie. The same goes for the game, as it can be completed in many different ways. There's a half a dozen endings that are distinctive of others, but when you count in all the different variables, the tally is 13. This kind of replayability is very rare in adventure games. As the story revolves around the same themes as the source material, the different endings aren't just cosmetics. You can side with the replicants, retire, in other words kill them, or just concentrate on saving your own hide. One of the biggest questions in the film is that is Rick Deckard a replicant? The answer is left for the audience to decide. Same thing goes for the game, for a certain extent. McCoy is or is not a replicant, and this varies depending on a playthrough. James Walls, a long-time game designer who started his career at Sierra Online in the 80s, has stated that the AI that controls the events in the game decides at random if McCoy is a replicant or not. This, of course, is a secret for the player. The definitive answer is vague, as it should be. Although the game is dynamic by nature, gameplay itself is traditional point-and-click goodness. McCoy gathers evidence, analyzes it, talks to people, and occasionally does some retiring. The technical gadgets from the film, such as the Voight-Kampff test and Esper device used for photo analysis, are also used in the game. There aren't traditional adventure game puzzles, but that's not big of an issue, as Blade Runner is a detective story, not an IQ test. The main objective is to experience the story and do that in several different ways. Because of the different endings, a single playthrough is relatively short. When I say short, I mean that in comparison with other adventure games of the 90s. When compared to modern adventure titles, Blade Runner holds its ground. Blade Runner is fun to play and gorgeous to look at. But the most important thing is that the themes of the game will stick in your brain long after you stop playing. This is what differentiates a good game from a classic. The game adaptation captures the soul of Blade Runner so well that it can be said that the game story actually complements the narrative of the movie. The game borrows just the right amount of elements to stand on its own feet, but it still remains faithful to the source material. This was one of the key elements on how Westwood was able to get their hands on the license. Westwood was founded in 1985 by Louis Castle and Brett Sperry. Although the studio is best remembered by the Command & Conquer real-time strategy games, Westwood has released several adventure and role-playing games such as Eye of Beholder, Lands of Lore and Legend of Kyrandia. Castle and Sperry were fans of Blade Runner, so in many regards, making a license game for the film was a dream come true. Castle and other Westwoodians wanted to use the source material to full extent, so instead of replicating, no pun intended, the events of the film, they decided to tell a totally new story in parallel with the movie. Because of this approach, Westwood could use characters from the movie, but they weren't bound to the original script. They could write their own story set in the same universe, a fanfiction of sorts. The game and the movie cross paths on occasion, and this strengthens the link between the two mediums. But securing the license wasn't an easy task. During the filming, the rights of the movie were distributed far and wide, and because of this, the rights holder Blade Runner Partnership had used years in order to secure all the rights from the movie from different parties involved. The partnership was still worried that some of the rights might be in the hands of others. When the official license game was in the works, Westwood's approach was selected partially for this reason. There is some controversy regarding on how Westwood was able to secure the license. Some sources say that Blade Runner Partnership was in talks with Sierra, Activision and other big publishers, and it was Virgin who eventually grabbed the license and tasked Westwood to produce the game. Once the project was announced, the other publishers contacted Virgin and said that they were also making a Blade Runner game. Either way, Westwood had the license, and after the release of Disney's Lion King platformer, they also had the confidence that they could produce a good license game. Louis Castle, the primus motor for the Blade Runner project, has stated that the primary objective of the game was to preserve the atmosphere of the movie. The execution of this is flawless. Although Blade Runner Partnership had done its best to secure the rights, the ownership was so convoluted that Westwood could only use the title of the movie. Luckily, Westwood had prepared for this, as their take on the story bypasses the events depicted in the movie. Some of the characters drop by and you get a glimpse of Deckard, but other than that, it was smooth sailing in perspective of rights. On the technical side, things were very different. Because of the hazy situation with the film rights, Westwood couldn't use any of the material produced for the film. Every single one of the cutscenes depicting Los Angeles was made from scratch. Although they look like they're straight from the film, they're actually elaborate replicas, again no pun intended, of the scenes from the film. All the environments too are near carbon copies of the sets from the movie, and they are constructed in similar manner. Sid Mead's original retro deco sets were built with everyday objects and furniture instead of designing something especially for the movie. Westwood's graphic artist constructed the 3D renderings of the game by modifying Mead's sets or concept art into an interactive playground. Castle tasked the graphics department by saying that creating something new was banned. Everything had to be derived from the material created by Mead. While the backgrounds are traditional in technological perspective, same can't be said about the rest of the graphics. Character models of the game are constructed by voxels, three-dimensional pixels. This is a finishing touch to the distinctive look of the game, and in my opinion, these voxel characters look a lot nicer than their polygon counterparts of the same era. According to the developers, in Blade Runner, voxels were used for the first time to create human characters. This way the developers could avoid the general blockiness which was common in the polygon graphics of the 90s. The soundtrack needed a lot of elbow grease. In the agreement made with Blade Runner Partnership, Westwood had rights to use the original score composed by Vangelis, but not the recordings. Composer Frank Lepaki had to recompose every track from the movie so that they could be used in the game. He also composed several new pieces of music in the same vein as was the original music. The finished game was packed on 4 CDs, but material was produced 100 times more. For example, the original script snowballed from 80 pages to 500. Resolution of the backgrounds and character models had to be scaled down in order to fit the game to 4 discs. And of course, the processing power of the consumer-created computers of the 90s was also an issue. Scaling was needed to get the game running smooth enough on a reasonably priced PCs. While the game sold over 1 million copies, it barely broke even. This was because of the hefty license fees Blade Runner Partnership was charging for the rights and the production costs. Putting the game on 4 CDs wasn't exactly cheap. Game designer James Walsh has stated that there were talks about a sequel, but the cost of making the first game quickly made it clear that this wasn't financially reasonable. To make matters worse, the source code and all the assets of the original game were lost, like tears in the rain, when Westwood moved from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. The rights for a Blade Runner licensed game are now in the hands of Electronic Arts. Blade Runner Partnership tried to sell the rights to Gearbox in 2009, but the studio's CEO Randy Pitchford has stated that making the game they wanted to would cost in total about $35 million, while the estimated sales would be around 600,000 units. The math just didn't add up. Blade Runner 2049 received praise from the audience and the critics, but was a disappointment in the box office. Time will tell if the sequel for the movie will be as impactful as the original film. In my opinion, Blade Runner 2049 is one of the best science fiction films of the recent times, and a worthy successor for the original. Perhaps in the coming years EA will make some use of the license, or not. If I'm totally honest, I don't think that EA is capable of producing a decent Blade Runner game. Until another Blade Runner game surfaces, we can just dream of Electric Sheep, or fear for a nightmare. Westwood's Blade Runner was released in 1997, well over a decade after the movie. The game was a commercial success and it won many awards after its release. In this era of re-releases and modernizations, Blade Runner is unfortunately nowhere to be found. I can't be the only one who would buy this in a heartbeat from GOG.com or Steam. The lost source files explain why there can't be a remake, but I would be more than happy with the original. I own the big box version of the game, and a few years ago it was notoriously hard to get this running on a modern computer. Luckily, there are solutions for this. There are downloadable installers for both Windows and Mac, and there's also unofficial support in a program called ScumVM. If you're not familiar with ScumVM, you should definitely check it out, especially if you're a fellow fan of adventure games. In short, it's a virtual machine capable of running dozens of old adventure games in a modern operating system. The latest development build supports Blade Runner, and the game is totally playable from start to finish. Even the save files work like a charm. Finding the proper data files from the game disks is somewhat of a chore, but not as nearly as painful as the other alternatives. Installing Windows 98 to a beat-up old retro computer just to get one game running is as inviting as a happy retirement party in Blade Runner style. So, if you haven't played this game, I strongly suggest that you do so. If you're a fan of Blade Runner or science fiction in general, I can almost guarantee that this is a home run. In conclusion, the year 2019 sure looks different in reality than in Blade Runner. Instead of space colonies, androids and flying cars, we are arguing if the Earth is round or not, and we have to warn people not to eat washing tablets. What the hell went wrong? But, as always, the race was hard and tire was bad, Until next time, Vuorikoski out.